I will introduce our team, and then maybe Al, you'd like to introduce Karen and Phil to us. How's that sound?
Yeah.
All right. So our team, which is from the Missional Network and Joining God, is myself, Sarah Jane, and Al Roxborough and Fiona Watts. And we're hosting this webinar, and you can learn more about us at TMN. We work together in all kinds of different ways around how we both resource and walk alongside congregations and pastors who are learning and discovering how to join God in their neighborhoods. And that's the work and the ministry that we're up to. And we are located physically right here in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. And we were teasing earlier that it was snowing like crazy here, which is not the norm in March. So, so that is the physical world that we also live in, and our neighborhoods are close to one another, actually, the three of us. So we have lots that we share in our neighborhood life together as well. Al, do you want to introduce Karen?
Let me first introduce Karen and be clear about that. It's not Karen, it's Karen. And Karen is a United Church pastor in Squamish, which is about 30 miles north of Vancouver, where she's been for 5-6 years.
10.
10 years, okay. And just very briefly, she is working with a wonderful community, but it's your classic mainline church community that gathers, worships, seeks to do good things amongst people, and coming out of her own life and background, she is in many ways seeking to invite their attention to what God's doing in the neighborhood. So that is Karen. Phil Reed is a Presbyterian pastor in, and let me see if I get this right, Grosse Ile in Detroit.
That's correct.
And Grosse Ile is actually an island, but it's an island with lots of bridges right in Detroit. And it is a much more, I would say, kind of upper middle class professional space. And so Phil has been a pastor there for a number of years. I'm not going to guess now. But again, with that particular kind of congregation, has been inviting it to imagine itself as engaging and being with the people in its communities. And both of them have got neat stories to tell you about how they're learning to do this. So Karen and Phil, great to have you as friends.
Thank you.
So we wanted to begin by just very quickly talking about this question. How do we encourage people to join with God in the neighborhood? And we have, in our work with clergy and pastors and congregations, we continue to hear all kinds of questions about what is this joining God and what does it look like to connect in our congregation, to connect in our neighborhoods, our congregations and our neighborhoods. And so this question has been rumbling in the service, and we keep hearing all kinds of how questions about what does this look like to invite our congregations on this journey of joining God in the neighborhood. So we just wanted to share a couple quick things. Al and Fiona and I just wanted to share a couple quick framing things, if you like, background. What are we talking about when we say joining God in the neighborhood, and what do we mean by that? Just so that we are really clear about what we're up to as we engage this question together. So Al and Fiona, do you want to jump in and add some things about what are we talking about when we say, how do we join with God in the neighborhood? How do we encourage our people to join with God in the neighborhood?
Fiona, why don't you jump in first?
Sure. I think this question has, as Sarah Jane was saying, has come out of a lot of work that we've done with clergy and congregations. And I think one of the things that we've learned along the way is there's lots of talk about how to do this. There's lots of ideas that fly around, and people are very much, you know, there's lots of people who are very much in line with, yeah, we have to do this. This is a great idea. This is going to be really important to the life of our congregation. And what is the consistent thing that we keep hearing, though, is, but we don't know how. And one of the things that is tricky about this is that there's not a prescribed way. There's not you just do all these things and then you're set. It's actually the how is revealed in the stories of people who are trying this out. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And so what we wanted to do was to provide some examples of how people have had some success in supporting their people in joining God in their neighborhood. Not to make that prescriptive, but to say, hey, here's some ideas, here's some things that have happened in other places that might help you to have a more, just think about this in a more grounded, practical, this is how we do this.
Yeah, but part of what I would add to that in terms of the practicalities is that what we observe very much is people are often unclear about the connection between in the neighborhood and joining God. At one level, in the neighborhood tends to mean, how do we do an assessment of neighborhoods in order to meet needs? How do we, all those sorts of things. And at the same time, the question of joining God seems like a fairly strange thing to link with being in the neighborhood. For mainline churches, the joining God side raises all kinds of anxieties. You asking us to become Jehovah's Witnesses and knock at doors and all that sort of thing. And for more evangelicals, there's a sense of, what do you mean joining God? Isn't it the fact that we take God to people? And so we've been working with this for a long, long time. There's something else happening. It's not about becoming Jehovah's Witnesses. It's not primarily about taking God, but how do we learn to listen and hear and engage with what God is already doing ahead of us? And that gets back to the how stuff that Fiona has talked about. So those are some of the things that we encounter and experience.
Thank you. And we want to just let you know that we are quite excited and energized by the fact that we've actually we have created a resource that does what Fiona said, which gives you a way to live into figuring out what is the how for where we are. So how do we actually walk with our congregation and begin to step into some pretty significant practices that help us join with what God's doing in the neighborhood. And we'll share a link with you about that after. We're not going to take a lot of time to talk about that now. It's called Stepping Out. And after the webinar, we'll send you that material. But just wanted to let you know that
comments about that?
That's a part of that. Pardon?
Can I make a comment about that?
Yes, absolutely.
It's that we've been at this, I've been at this 20 or more years. And what we do and what we've done quite recently is say, what are we learning? I mean, here we are working with hundreds of congregations and denominational systems. And we stepped back and said, what is it that we're learning? And it's out of that learning quite recently that we actually almost remade a lot of the stuff and began to create some resources that come very, very specifically out of what we're learning on the ground rather than big ideas that are going on.
Excellent, thank you. So we want to invite Karen and Phil. Karen, I wonder if you would be willing to share your story first with us. We want to invite you to share with us a story around this question. How do you encourage your people to join with God in the neighborhood? And what we'd love to know is what is a story of something that you did? Just what did it look like? What were some of either the first things you did or even just some things recently where you were in your neighborhood encouraging your people to connect and join with God? And what did that look like?
So as I said at the beginning, I have been here in Squamish for 10 years. And I think the first thing that I want to say, having started to engage in this work around neighborhood and even is that it didn't happen magically. It's been a long process, of working through the ethos of our congregation, especially being a United Church mainline congregation that traditionally worships on a Sunday morning and maybe does a book study during the week, and we're good. We've got it all figured out. And I come from a very missional background, and so that wasn't ever kind of enough for me. But I honestly have been blessed to be a part of a congregation that when I came here, they knew they needed to change. They knew they had to do something different. And they had one thing that was really at their heart, and that was to figure out how to care for community. And so that's a blessing that I had coming in, because that was their desire from the beginning. What we have ended up doing, it is a whole long story that I warned the group before that I'm going to try not to just preach, because that's what I do. But we have built a community hub that we, when I came here, typical United Church story, declining elderly congregation, but knew they needed to do something different and wanted to. The building was declining. It just happened that some of our board members were also on the board of the local community services. And they started to talk in those board meetings about their desire to build a community hub. And after a lot of conversations, we realized we had 5 lots of land and we needed to rebuild, and so did the local community services. And it was when we started to look at each other's mission and vision and discovered that both of us had a mission and vision of creating a stronger, healthier individuals and community, that we started to go, wait a minute, we're on the same page. And so in October of 2017, we opened up what's called Centerpoint, and it is a facility that holds social workers' offices, 2 daycares, 32 units of affordable housing. Our sanctuary has become a community hub that is used daily. How did we encourage people to come alongside of that? It was really having constant conversation about our why, about who are we, just knowing who we authentically were. We had offers to buy our land, to build large buildings, you know, all the things that are very attractive to churches and making the big money. But our community knew that that wasn't our mission. And so through the 15 years this process was in works, the thing that I would say we had to stay consistent with was constant conversations about how are we coming alongside God's mission for our community. So maybe that's a very nutshell of how, yeah.
Could you tell me what does it look like when you have conversations about God's mission in your community?
So in the early days, you know, we pulled out some missional network books and we looked at what communities were doing and churches were doing and had Bible studies and book studies. And we tried a lot of program and we tried a lot of figuring it out. I mean, and a lot of stuff just didn't fly until we started to pause and really recognize, let's be honest, we don't have the resources, the energy, the strength to do the mission we used to do. And until we got honest about who we were, it really, the project wouldn't fly. So, you know, it sounds kind of quaint, but we had to constantly go back to our why and discover Squamish is one of the youngest, fastest growing communities in all of Canada. So, so we came to know that a community hub that we didn't have was necessary. So it was really getting on board with discovering not just what were the needs in the community, but where was God leading us? And it kind of, in a lot of ways, landed in our laps. But we constantly had to keep refocusing on the fact that we weren't building a building. We were building a mission, that we were joining God in what, and we use that language over and over and over again. I would say ad nauseum. I preached on loving our neighbors, like, you know, just every single day, every single Sunday, we talked about it. And we started to discover what actually our neighbors were longing for.
Al or Fiona, do you have any other questions? Or
Just that very more basic, concrete. Someone's asking, Karen, what size is your congregation?
So we were a congregation of about 40 on a Sunday morning. That's where we were. We're now a congregation of about 60 to 70 on a Sunday morning. So we're not a large congregation.
Yeah, no, it's just somebody's asking. One of the things that caught me was your recognition that amongst your people, one more program was not going to do it.
Yes.
And what we talk about a lot, and be interested in your reflections on that then, is we talk a lot about how one of the gifts we bring of dwelling with is how we listen with people. Can you talk a little bit about how that developed and percolated? Because it's not usually a strength of a congregation.
Nor is it often a strength of a minister. So what I would say is that we really did, I and my people needed to stop beating ourselves up for not being able to, I don't know, create one more soup kitchen, create one more thrift store, create, you know, all the things that are the regulars, that we thought that's what churches are supposed to be doing. We had to stop and go, this is authentically who we are. I guess that's the authentic piece is maybe what became the key piece for us, Alan, is that we had to get honest that we didn't have capacity to do those other things that we kind of expected churches to have to do, and that was okay.
Yeah.
That didn't mean that God was not alive, well, and at work.
Got it. Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, helps a lot.
So Karen, there's a question on the chat about what is the role of Karen's church congregation members in the hub?
Okay, that's a great question. So the original building has been built so that there is our sanctuary, and our offices are a part of the building. That also, our church is connected to 2 daycares. We can actually open our walls to expand our sanctuary into daycares. So we're very close to one another. So that's just but what has happened is we also very intentionally built our new sanctuary to be a multi-use facility. So now our connection that has naturally evolved has been that we have events that happen from the community services in our facilities weekly. But we've also started to grow with young families, because that's what's surrounding us. And people liked the mission and the vision, and they liked that church was suddenly connected. What one of the greatest gifts has been as people walk their children to preschool, I meet them, and their kids are coming into the sanctuary and saying, well, what is it? What's a church? And I get to say, oh, let me show you. And so being a part of that has been key. But what we have now a before and after school care program. We have a drop-in music class. Those are run by the church, and they've become the mission of the church. So programs have started, but they have become out of the authentic learning and connecting with community. But really, it's also that we have offered a gift and provided space for the community to use.
So it's like, so as you're describing it, I'm imagining a big shared space.
Yeah.
And there's all kinds of people that are coming and going in the space that you've created. Some of the activities that happen there are run by the community, and you get to interact with folks who are coming in for that. And then some of the activities that are run there are run by folks in your church. Yeah. And people are connecting with those too. So it's this whole integrated kind of relational partnership that you've created in a facility that the community was longing for because of the influx of younger families who are looking for places to connect and belong.
That's right. That's exactly what it is, Fiona. And I think one of the other pieces that has been integral to us as leadership and staff has been that we also didn't want to just become another rental facility. So when people use our facility, sure, there's some that, rent for a one-off event or because we're one of the very few spaces in town that is affordable to do so. But also our regular groups that come in, we've been very intentional about getting to know them, saying our hellos, being welcoming. It's a very shared space. As you can imagine, that comes with other challenges. But we have, I've really shared with our staff and our leadership that we are going to, that I want us to be the place of welcome and the place of grace. And so, you know what, like, yes, we want them to clean up their stuff, but we don't get angry when they don't, like, just being very, very flexible and welcoming. And that has meant that those folks that worked in the social service agency that were really nervous, the first week when the property manager for the other agency came in, he said, I don't know, just straight up said, I don't know what to do with you. You're a Christian pastor. And now I had dinner at his house last week. Like we're friends because we've just tried our really to keep that welcome, but we also are very honest about who we are. We're a church, we're a spiritual space. This is who we are, and
That's great. Thanks, Karen. We're going to integrate these stories back in so we can come back and ask more questions or respond to some more of the questions in the chat. But I want to invite Phil to jump in and share a little bit about a particular way that you are, Phil, encouraging and inviting your own congregation, what that looks like to invite people in your congregation to join with God in the neighborhood. I know you got lots of stories, so.
Just by way of introduction, let me say the size of congregation we are and what kind of congregation we are, but I want to reserve the right to come back and talk about that at the end of telling a couple of stories. We're a mainline congregation of about 600. We are fully programmed and fully resourced. We have something for everybody almost every day. We're that kind of place. We're running tons of stuff. And I've been here 10 years too, Karen, and In that time, we made kind of a change. We're changing from being a program-oriented church to a service-oriented church. And the reason for that is we're getting to develop a new understanding of who God is and how God works in our lives. And I've been preaching ad nauseum, love your neighbor, since I've been here. And what that means for us is that we believe that God comes to people, through other people. And if you're going to get to know God, you got to get to know the people. And that means developing reciprocal relationships with people who don't show up for your programs and don't show up and sing hymns. And this is people who are out there. And we've been working on that to develop reciprocal relationships where we learn and grow and hear together and get a lot of input and do some stuff together. So let me tell you about diapers, income tax returns, and restaurants.
Yeah.
One of the things we did was we built in a research and development aspect of our mission budget, meaning we put seed money into our mission budget so that if a member of the church could develop a reciprocal relationship with some people outside the congregation and an idea arose from them of how we might serve, we had some money to start that. They could come to our mission committee, they could give us an idea, and we'd say, yeah, we're going to put some money into it. So a member of our congregation is out there, she happens to be an educator, and figures out that on the bridge card, which is a social service card that helps people get groceries and those kinds of immediate needs, on your bridge card, you can't put diapers. You can't buy diapers through social services. You are responsible to buy diapers on your own. Diapers are pretty expensive. If you're a single mom and you've got kids and you want to go to daycare, you often have to bring a certain number of diapers with you. You know, this gets to be an expense. She says, let's start a diaper bank. Let's find a way to give people who need them diapers. So we did that 2.5 years ago. We established a diaper bank. We do it out of our church. We have to purchase and repackage all the diapers. We figured out a distribution system. And in 2.5 years, we've given out almost 500,000 diapers. We also have relationships with some of the people we're giving the diapers to. So God comes to people through people, but you have to talk to them. You have to engage them. Here's another example. We are in a fairly affluent community, and the congregation reflects the community. For some in the community, they're not in the same situation or not too far from us. There's people who aren't in that situation. Every year in the United States, we file income tax. For a lot of people, it's fairly simple, but a daunting process. We had somebody come in our congregation, developing relationships, talking to people, seeing that income tax preparation is a big deal. So we developed a way that our people could get trained and then go out and prepare income tax returns for other people. So every January in our church, in one service, we commission people to go prepare income tax returns. I mean, we have traditional worship. The service ends with a sending. Well, instead of that being just a generic sending, go out, live the Christian life, we're sending specific people to do a specific task. And we're doing income tax returns. Well, now we have 25 people that do it. And they go out, they do it. You want to develop relations with people, talk about money, talk about these things. Hear the stories about people whose income is probably less than ours and how they're getting by and what they're spending their money on. And what can we do to help them think through that while preparing an income tax return? Once we figured out this sending thing was a good thing, we started sending people not only to do church stuff, but to do regular stuff. We were sending people to go out and do their regular work. So after we would send income tax preparers, we took bankers and accountants and finance people and everybody else we could think of that was working in some kind of financial aspect of their lives. We were commissioning them during worship and then sending them out to serve through their occupations, through their vocations, in Jesus' name. Restaurants. So we wanted to get serious about hearing about how other people were perceiving God. We wanted to learn and listen how people around us saw God active in their lives. And we didn't want this to be just a secondary conversation, but to be the main point of the conversation. So here was our idea. In Detroit, there are pop-up restaurants. This is a restaurant that would pop up in a single place and would only be advertised social media. It's there for one night. This is some chef or something he's getting going, he's testing out a meal. You go to the pop-up restaurant, there's no menu, you're gonna get what you're gonna get. There's a set price, and it's go, have the experience, and then it's done. That's it. We thought, wow, what about pop-up church? What if we did something like that? If we just went and popped up and tried to gather people. Well, a team from our congregation took this idea and worked it around and was really big on the idea of us not doing it, but having who's really doing it, the people who come, and we're just gonna listen. So they developed what we call God Talk Unlimited. And we go to a business or some other place and we advertise only through social media. And all that we say is, we'd love to hear your God story. And that's it. It's patterned after the Moth on public radio, if you know what the Moth is. Now we structure the experience and we host it. There's coffee, there's some treats. What we found is businesses love to have us. We no longer have to search out a place to do it. They come to us. We've been in coffee shops, we've been in hair salons, we've been in art galleries, we've been in bars, which that seems to be our favorite place. We've been in breweries. Restaurants or these businesses love to have us because we create foot traffic. And we develop relationships with owners. We're there for an hour and a half. People come in. We ask everybody, if you'd like to tell a story, put your name in a hat. We're going to pull your name out. It needs to be 5 minutes. We keep track of the time. We have people who host. We do fun stuff in between. But we hear God stories. And if you'd like to hear some of them, look on our Facebook page, God Talk Unlimited. We ask some people if we can record them. Can we post them? Sure. Others, no, that's okay. We post snippets of what people say. We're interested in what they know and believe and know something about God. And what we're learning is there's a lot of people out there who like to talk about it. And we've discovered there's really something holy in listening. I think we've done it about 12 times. We've had 50 people, we've had 40 people, depending on the place. I think our smallest has been around 20, maybe 25. And now we're trying to figure out what the next step is. But what's happening is some of the people who aren't connected to the church are now becoming part of our team. They've begun to see it as a community. And This is not marketing. This is not a way of enticing people to come to church. It's something new, and something new is emerging from it. We don't know exactly what it is yet, but something is happening. So when people ask, what's the size of your congregation? I can tell you the number of members, but we've developed another way of describing the size of our congregation. And we got this idea from McDonald's. Any McDonald's sign, if you look at it, it says McDonald's, and then it says billions and billions served. They don't tell you how many people work there. They don't tell you how many stockholders are there. They don't tell you what the budget is or how many people are in the restaurant on any given day. They tell you the number of people they've served. So that's how we think about the size of our congregation. Not just the number of people who show up, but the number of people that we engage, the number of people that we serve. Because God comes to people through people.
Thanks, Phil. I wanted to ask Jodine's question. I think it's a great question here, which is maybe just let's stick with the moth, maybe the moth one or one of the three stories, Phil, your call. What have the people in your congregation been learning that has surprised them from these practices? So what's been going on for them?
They're learning how powerful they are. They're learning that Christian faith isn't just a spectator thing that you come and watch in church, which is pretty typical for Presbyterians, but it's something that you do. And if you do it, you're empowered.
As I was listening to your three examples, Phil, it struck me that the common element in all of them is about finding ways to create and build relationships with other people. The diapers and the tax returns and the whatever else were just a means to an end in order to create space for some new relationships to be formed. And through that, the folks in your congregation are probably learning things that they had no idea around how God is working in the lives of people that they might not otherwise have any opportunity to even be in conversation with.
Oh, sure, exactly. Once you listen to people, people tell you what God's doing in their lives, whether they realize it or not. And we're not that great at picking that up. We're not that great of discerning that. And it's a particularly hard thing to do for sort of an insular group of people like a typical Presbyterian church, that rarely see what God is doing beyond the parking lot in a Presbyterian church. But
I think that really gets to the point of, in one sense, you could listen to Karen's stories and Phil's stories, and you could say, well, it just sounds like programs in a different note. And I saw people asking this question, but here's what strikes me, and I'd love you both to comment on it, and I'm not trying to give you leads, but I think Phil's point is correct, that congregations have tended to become insular and think about, if you think about neighborhood, you think about, well, what's the program we can create? And if you try to jump over that and say, well, we're not doing anything, just go and be with, the anxiety goes off the scale. Mm-hmm. So to be a wise leader, you've got to start where they are and say, what are the ways, whether it's diapers or community centers, that begin to create the connections? That gives the space in which you can begin then to invite into a different kind of listening. It's a listen, I mean, this takes more time, but it's about a listening with alongside of, it's attending to the stories. But you can't get to any of that unless you do it and kind of through what Karen and Phil have been described. But be interested in your responses to that.
Yeah, you need to give people an excuse or a structure to get out there in order so they feel comfortable and confident. And that's how they become part of a team. You know, we're all doing this together, or some of us are doing this together. And so, yeah, it's an excuse to develop relationships. And
Yeah. Karen, what about you?
Yeah, I think that's exactly key. And back to what I said at the beginning is it takes time. It is a culture shift. I saw somebody, say, well, but it is a culture shift, because just like many mainline churches, this congregation had become very insular, and even, as a minister, it's easy to become insular because you're like, okay, my job is to lead worship on a Sunday morning. And yet beginning to catch, hearing the stories of what was happening in the lives of my folks. We spent a lot more time sitting around tables having coffee conversations at the beginning to hear what was happening in lives. And we started with ourselves, and then we started discovering what we were doing out in the community. Somebody said, how did you discover what were the needs of the community? It was about listening. It was about we didn't do, the big proper surveys and all, we could have done that. And we started to develop some of those, but we found those to be make work projects for us. What we discovered is a lot of what Phil is saying is that as we built relationships, we started to discover how we connected in community and how we connected with needs. And that continues to be where we feel most alive in ministry, where we feel the Spirit is at work. When we start to try and tell people what they need, then usually we fail. That's
yeah. It's interesting to push that a little further. Somebody wrote, "What's the opposite of insular?" Well, insular is being turned in and focused on one's own self and one's own issues, whether individual or congregation. And so, in what we're up to here. And again, this is a larger conversation, is that it used to be okay for churches to be insular because they were like car dealerships, and everybody out there was wanting to buy a car. And so what you would do is, how do we market best our cars?
That's right.
But that's not the world that we live in anymore. And it's like, how do we repattern and relearn ways of becoming, and I think this is the God thing, the God practice, becoming interested in who the other is that's there.
Yes.
I mean, I tell the story of how when I first moved to this community 6 years ago, one of the things I decided to do was to go to the coffee shop and get to know people who were there. And the people I got to know happened to be the people who sat outside and smoked, and they got rid of that now, so that's a problem. But it was the capacity to listen to those folk without me needing to have answers or solutions or methods. It was incredible. That's insularity. And what's behind it, and I'll stop here, is a conviction that we have, is that if we want to know what God is up to, alongside our Bible studies, it's how do we listen in that non-insular way to the people who are there. But the journey to that is through the kind of things that you guys are doing. And I should stop.
Alan, I want to say one of the things that I've found in conversations around this work of getting into the neighborhood, there's lots of talk about going to the coffee shop. And so I tried with all my might to figure out how to find the time to go and have coffee. But I work full time and I have 2 young children. And going and sitting for a coffee just didn't fit in my agenda.
Well, Karen, that's a spiritual failure.
That's a spiritual, yeah, thank you. If it was a glass of wine, then we could talk. Well, no, I'm just kidding. No, but what I learned, and my congregation now knows, is that I decided to make picking my children up from school a spiritual practice. So now we play at the playground when it's not freezing and raining for a long time. And I talk with the parents, and that's my coffee shop, right? So it's just an example of, now I no longer feel guilty about leaving work to go get my kids. I realize this is part of my work. This is part of being in community, and that connection has been integral to the work we do.
Yeah, one idea we got from Alan about 8 or 9 years ago was to actually include that in ministry descriptions or job descriptions. That,
Nice.
X percentage of the pastor's time will be engaging the community.
That's right.
And once it's on the job description, then you're accountable to do it. And you have to report that to your governing body or your session or whoever that is. And it's quite a thing when once a month they're saying, okay, what did you do to engage out there? And so now we're trying to put that in our ministry descriptions for ministers in our presbytery, that you will spend X percentage of your time engaging people in your community, and this is part of your job.
And as we look at, just in this question, how do you encourage your people to join God in the neighborhood? Both of you are telling stories, and specifically that example at the playground, Karen, of how you actually are doing this work yourself. So the leading is actually doing the work. So it's not just about getting your people. I mean, Karen, you talked about this culture change. It's not about getting your people to think the right thoughts and have all the newest right ideas. It's actually, how are you yourself in your own actions and in your own way of life demonstrating what it's like to show up without an agenda, without a need to figure out how do I get those moms to come to this coffee time, but just to show up and listen and pay attention to what's going on in the people's lives that you bump into every day. And that this belief that God is active and at work in the playground and in those listening conversations, and that your role as a leader and as a follower of Jesus is to be asking, how and in what ways am I encountering God in this conversation and in this practice? And that's so counterintuitive. So we talk about culture change. It's how are we constantly creating these kinds of opportunities and encouraging our people, like Phil in the listening in the moth-like listening experiment that you're doing. How are you're giving your people this opportunity to listen and to be attentive in a really, really practical, doable kind of way, and giving them all kinds of ways of reflecting, like, what is God up to? And as we lead our people into joining with what God's doing, this is like creating a whole new way of listening and being present. And I hear that through both of you, this culture change. It's about creating these opportunities, whether they're in programs or aside programs. It's like you're subversively creating all these opportunities to be naming what God's doing and to be creating opportunities for people to listen and name, even if they don't always know they're doing that, to name what God is doing. It's like creating all these new muscles, all these new capacities inside of them.
And I think what you're doing there, just to add on to that, is that this is a counterintuitive way of addressing the huge question that obsesses many leaders called discipleship, where what we do I've been guilty of this. We look around for what's the book, what's the model, what's the training to give it to people. And, you know, it's the old fill the head with information and send them out kind of thing. But it's amazing. It's like when people begin to go on this journey, when they sit in a community center across from somebody and they're having a conversation or handing out, they come back and they say, I actually didn't know how to listen to God. What does that mean? And it's when that takes place that rather than us as leaders telling, you begin to go, well, let's talk about how we might try that out and test it. It reminds me, without going too far down that road, like if you read 1 Corinthians, Paul keeps going, or whoever wrote it, but Paul keeps going, now concerning. In other words, he's interacting with questions that people asked. And the beauty of that is that, since as most of the people here are leaders, if you think of the Acrocorinth and you think of the marketplace leading down to the waterfront and all these people, some are Christians, you've got people in the marketplace and others are coming up to them saying, so you've become a Christian, what the heck is that about? And they come back together around a table and they said, I was asked this question, I have no clue. That's the way in which we go about this. This is action reflection. It's learning by being present and doing. And man, does it lift the burden of anxiety from leaders who think they have to have all the answers.
So Quentin has a question here. I hear the phrases of connecting with people without having an agenda, and I'm having trouble understanding. So in my thinking, the Great Commission and the Great Commandment clearly spell out an agenda. What would you say is the end goal of joining God in the neighborhood?
Sure. The part of, well, let me put it this way, that what we're describing is what I would call a penultimate goal. That is, how do you get to carrying out, let's just not quibble, how do you get to carrying out the Great Commission, making the disciples? When we've created churches, by and large, that are locked into themselves and whose sense is we've got God. We just need methods to get God to other people. What we're talking about is that if we are to hear the ways in which God by the Spirit is already ahead of us, shaping what kingdom life is like, then it becomes increasingly critical for us as Christians in communities to learn fresh ways of listening to what I call the ferment and the bubble of what's happening amongst people, and to listen to that from the perspective of how are we hearing God here? Because it's in that kind of listening that we get the clues to how to be people on the Great Commission. So that's the way in which I would frame a response to your question.
I think for me too, and maybe this goes without saying, but it's so easy for us to go out and do a program or go out and meet our neighbor with the agenda in the back of our mind that, you know, like if I really do this well, their butt's gonna be in my church on Sunday morning, right? And let's be honest, that's how I feel like I was trained. Like that's the goal, that's the commission. Like, let's go out and love these people so that then they become a member of my church and ultimately give me money to pay my salary or whatever it is. And we work against that. I work against it internally, and with our folks to remember that actually the job is to love one another. That's what we're called to do. And that's the bottom line. So if I'm loving somebody authentically, if I'm in a reciprocal loving relationship, then my agenda isn't to change them so that they church the way I do it. I'm called to love people in the neighborhood. And that, to me, that's the no agenda. That's the switch. And yeah. So that to me is so important, and it's not easy. I'm not saying that's the culture shift, and we continue to do it, and we continue to discover when we actually authentically love people, then we're in an authentic relationship, and that's what the church is called to be.
Fiona or Alan, anybody else have any other comments they want to make to that question or comment? I'm just going to say a blessing for us as we finish up here, but I'm just going to ask if Al or Fiona, you wanted to say anything else.
Yeah, the only thing I would say is that within the life of congregations, which are the key structural forms within which Christianity shapes itself in the West and in North America, and they're not going to go away. And we all need to get over saying, ain't it awful? These are the most wonderful places in the world. The shift that's going on, which I think is a huge calling of the Holy Spirit, is what I call, it's a shift from being what I call ecclesiocentric, thinking about the congregation of the church as the be all and the end all, to discovering again that God in Jesus is the active agent out ahead of us, already announcing and bringing about the kingdom, because we've become so insular in our congregations. And what we're talking about here are ways in which we as leaders are wrestling with that shift and looking at how we ourselves with our congregations join this massive change of imagination that I think is the gift of the Spirit of our time.
Thank you.
There's a question there from Hannah. We finished the webinar. Where can we see here, read more about the conversation?
Yeah, we'll send you some links through email, and maybe as I finish up here, Fiona can add some links to the chat there for folks as well. There's probably a few different places that she can point you to as well. I just want to thank Karen and Phil for joining us, for sharing their stories, and for showing up with their own sort of capacity to listen, and let us kind of listen in on where they have been experimenting and what they've been up to. There's just some rich stuff in both your stories. So thank you both for being with us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I just wanted to close with a very simple blessing from our Stepping Out resource, just one of the liturgies that we use inside that resource. And we'll just use that as a blessing as we finish. So Lord, you have called us to another way of being in the world, to your way of loving, living, and being with neighbors. Open our hearts and give us courage to embrace your example and call, to be a people of relationship rather than outcomes, a people who listen without agenda, a people who attend to the stories of our neighbors, and a people discerning what the Spirit may be saying to us. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
your time.